Hey there, this is Tyler. Welcome to lesson 2 of EQ Performer. This lesson is self-management. In lesson 1, we learned about self-awareness and having the ability to understand our emotions, not looking at them as good, bad, but simply as a guide to help us move forward, maintaining awareness in the situations that we're facing, in the moment. Being able to check in and quickly recognize, I just got triggered. What was the trigger? And if I was triggered, what is that feeling inside? And how does it manifest? Am I speeding up? Am I slowing down? Am I wanting to keep my voice from being heard? Am I trying to express myself too much, too aggressively? What do I need to do to move myself forward? And that's what self-management is all about. We're going to talk about what we hear in self-talk. Because self-management, so much of it is self-talk. We're going to talk about rewriting a negative script and exploring those negative self-talk patterns. You see, we can't control other people. We've already established that, right? As much as you may want to have someone in your life that you just say, hey, do this, and they go do it, we don't often have that ability. And so the greatest thing we can do to gift ourselves is to realize, hey, I'm only in control of me, and the best version of me that shows up, life is going to be better than it was before. It might cause some change, but life only gets better when we become our most authentic, powerful selves. We're going to look at negative self-talk patterns and ultimately look at how we can track and reframe that negative dialogue. You see, most of self-management isn't about going out and learning how to stop from punching a wall. Most of it is learning, okay, I have great self-awareness, but now what do I do with it? And that's what self-management is all about. It's the ability to keep track of our emotions so that we can stay fluid in any given situation and how we react to people. You see, you could respond in a catabolic, energetic way. When you say, well, what does that mean? Catabolic energy is simply energy that's destructive. It leaves you in an apathetic state, victim level thinking, or maybe you even ascend into the conflict level where there's anger and frustration and you take that out on other people. What we want to do is step into anabolic thinking where there's growth. There's movement towards stronger, more outcomes that are beneficial to not just work settings, but home life as well. And so we begin to take responsibility for the world around us. We take ownership instead of casting blame on other people. We look to serve other people and see how we can help out the situation instead of making it worse. You know, what do we contribute that can make this a better environment, situation, taking care of other people? And I love the win-win. I'll say it all day long. It's when you can get something and the other person can get something as well, even if you have to take something off the table that you really wanted. And how powerful is it to know that you both win? I don't think it gets much better than that. And so self-management is all about improving our skills and learning how to control that self-talk. People who are able to self-manage can respond to their emotions any way they choose. Having the power to control a difficult situation, maybe react quickly to change versus staying in a pattern of being spun out for multiple hours or even days. Because at the end of the day, this is about taking greater initiative to achieve our goals. If we just talk about self-awareness, if we just talk about self-management, then we become fluent in a language, but we're not putting that into practice. And eventually, it's like a muscle. We have to exercise it. We have to keep it fresh and pliable. And it takes effort. It takes time. It takes work. But it's powerful because someone with a high level of self-management is able to not lose their cool. You get a lot of credibility with management because you take responsibility and you're able to work with other people well, even if you don't really appreciate someone else's style of work. You might not like how they operate, but you're able to check yourself and manage your response to any situations that are frustrating, and you deal with it in a manner that's polite and professional, even though you might be upset. And instead of talking behind somebody's back and giving in the temptations to dive into gossip and be a cause of the problem, you take ownership of it. Versus someone with low self-management who, when something goes wrong, they respond too quickly, sharply, and say things they don't mean to say. Or maybe they mean to say them, but they shouldn't have because it's not going to produce an optimal outcome. When you speak and act hurriedly, things sometimes don't go so well. And so before you know it, there's just an intense environment to work in. So again, when we think about books and movies that have triggered something within us, we can look at questions, and this helps us as we begin our own journey of discovery. We can ask questions: what's the character feeling in the situation? And not just what they're feeling, but what do you see happening on a physical reaction? I guess you've been watching a movie at some point and you felt an emotion that they were conveying, and then you actually had a response to it yourself. So think about what the effect, the self-talk of that person's actions, what do they have on that person? What's the awareness of the other person? The ability to handle the situation and manage the relationship to a positive outcome. We'll talk more about how to have social awareness and relationship management in lessons 3 and 4. But this is where it starts, because now you're not just looking internally at yourself, you're going, how am I going to respond to this? What is this other person thinking or feeling, and what is the outcome of this interaction? Because most of the time, we just aren't thinking about how our self-talk affects us or other people. Not all self-talk is the same. It's the internal dialogue that is running through our minds, and it gives us different reminders, to-do lists, memories, encouragements, hopes, worries, criticisms, and ultimately it helps us differentiate between positive and negative. But we have to do the work. So let's see if any of these sound familiar. It's not just necessarily a negative thing all the time, but it does tend to be more negative than positive, as we've mentioned. So you have a triggered event that creates an emotional reaction. Well, most of us act without thinking, and that produces a negative result. And that cycle continues over and over again. But what's powerful here is we have emotional reaction, we're triggered by something, and then we go into self-talk. And self-talk can produce 2 actions. If we're in negative self-talk, it's going to produce negative results. But if we have positive self-talk, we can oftentimes shift the results into a positive versus the negative. So, what if someone's overgeneralizing? What might they say? One single event becomes I always or I never. Have you ever said I always or I never in an argument or a conflict situation? Well, oftentimes that's overgeneralizing, because it's not always and it's not never. It's sometimes, but rarely is it always. Discounting the positives. Sometimes we ignore all the good and dwell on the bad. Or we label things. A negative permanent trait, which would be, I'm stupid, or I'm not smart enough to do this one little task efficiently, and everybody thinks I'm an idiot. We personalize things. We think that it's always my fault that something happens. This isn't even about somebody else interacting with us. This is simply our own self-talk. We blame. Everyone else is responsible for anything that happens. Nothing's my fault. I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. Polarizing. Thinking everything's either right or wrong, good, bad, perfect, or failure. There's no in between. It's black and white. Not having any grace for any situations. And then sometimes we magnify. We make more of an event than it actually is. So what I want you to do when you think about self-management, I want you to navigate through your self-talk. Well, what if your self-talk is, I always get hurt? Well, that type of self-talk is an overgeneralization. So something happens and you have this thought, I always get hurt. What is the action that you take because of that? Well, let's say when you think that, you tend to disconnect from people. Well, then we look at the positive or negative result. Because of my disconnection from people, I'm unable to develop the relationships that are really meaningful in my life. And that pattern repeats itself over and over again. Well, see, now that we know that, now that we put that into place, we have the ability to move forward and change the conversation and reframe the situation. You see, when we overgeneralize, instead of thinking always, we can look at it as situation specific. I don't always get hurt. I'm only hurt in this specific situation in this very moment. If we discount the positives, instead we can count the positives. If we label things, instead of always labeling it one way, we can just say it was just a mistake in this very moment. Instead of personalizing, we can say, well, it's not entirely me. Instead of polarizing, we can see the gray area. And instead of magnifying things, we can interpret the event realistically. It wasn't that big. It felt big, but it wasn't that big. And instead of blaming, we can take ownership and recognize that it takes two to tango. It takes three to tango. It's not always one person causing a situation. We always can look at it and see that, well, there's a few variables in there. Maybe I had a little more to do with it than I want to recognize. Or maybe I don't really feel like I had anything to take ownership of, but, I do take responsibility that I had something. And it might take some time to digest, but, it wasn't just me. Or it wasn't just you. So we reframe self-talk and we make the most of it. Because our internal conversations are based mostly on how we're feeling. Funny enough, most of us can't tell each other how we're feeling exactly in any given moment. And if we do, we label it very easily: happy, sad, angry. So how can we rewrite these scripts? Well, when you think one thing, instead think the other. Just like we talked about. And what kind of action plan is needed? Well, again, any action plan means there's movement taking place. And so in self-management, what we do is we learn about ourselves through self-awareness, and now we have something to do about it. Maybe I need to practice taking deep breaths when I get triggered, because when I take deeper breaths, I get more oxygen, and I slow down that natural response to speed up. Or maybe I need to make an emotional versus rational list to help me determine the self-talk that I want to practice and separate the moment so I can have a greater awareness. Maybe I'll count to 10 the next time I feel I'm getting frustrated. Oftentimes, especially in deeper, more intimate relationships amongst family members, it's easy to get triggered. It's easier to get triggered at home than it is at work. Oftentimes, you feel more comfortable because maybe the fallout isn't as great. If you have a fallout at work, you go there every single day, and now you've got 12 other people looking at you, and there's something more uncomfortable about that than just letting loose on a spouse or someone you're in a relationship with, right? Well, counting to 10 is extremely powerful. So, hey, I need a minute. And counting to 10 might turn into 10 minutes, or it might turn into 10 hours. But taking time to breathe through the moment, to step back and to just take stock of what's happening. Sleeping on it for that full night gives you perspective and clarity, and maybe a few clearer emotions. Maybe talking with management and creating tactics to move and manage yourself well. Maybe it's learning how to take control of negative self-talk by noticing it, stopping it, and then replacing it with something more positive. Some people need to visualize them managing their emotions, seeing the new outcome before they actually experience the outcome, because they've never done that before. They've stuck in negative self-talk for so long that managing it well is just a challenge. And so they need to visualize it first, even think what it could feel like. What would it look like? And ultimately, it's about learning valuable lessons from difficult people that we encounter. It's one of the greatest challenges of all, is recognizing I'm only responsible for me. And this person triggers me like no one else, but I'm going to continue to dive into this and understand what I can do to not change them, but navigate this situation as best as possible. And sometimes we need to put a mental recharge into our schedule to keep us healthy and strong, accepting the change that's coming around the corner, being prepared and ready for what's to come. The challenges of self-management are real. It takes time to develop the ability to create awareness and then do something about it. But the one thing that I know is that the human spirit is resilient. Having the ability to navigate, sometimes it goes really well and you just flow through life and you're like, man, that's the greatest change I've made in my life. And other times, it's a great change, but the road isn't so easy. You have other people around you that are not so easy to navigate. But having the awareness, you realize that you have more control than you thought. Because ultimately, it's your decision how you respond. Self-management is all about knowing the experience you're having and then choosing the reaction.